Sounds great.
Greetings, Rhys. I was going to say good evening, but it's afternoon for you, so I don't know. I'll just say hello.
Evening for you, eh?
Just say hi. How's it?
Evening for you, Lloyd.
Yeah, so good to chat and catch up a little bit. Do you want to just introduce yourself? Just give a little snippet about yourself, your family, maybe, and just your current situation before we go any further.
Great. Yeah. So I'm married to Sarah. We are coming up on, I think, about 24 years. And we have two wonderful kids. Our daughter is 19 and she's in her second year of university here in Vancouver. And our son is 17, finishing his schooling at the moment. So yeah, we moved to Vancouver 10 years ago to plant a church here. Before that, so both Sarah and I grew up in South Africa, born and raised there, and then moved to the UK. I actually moved to Brighton initially, then went back to Cape Town. Sarah and I got married, and then we moved over to the UK. And then we're involved in planting a church in London in 2004. And then in 2010, God spoke to us about moving to Vancouver to plant. And so that's the journey we've been on since then. And
awesome.
God's been very faithful to us in this process, over these years. So
awesome. I'd love to just hear from you, just maybe this latest adventure, Vancouver, and the last 10 years. How did you sort of feel God calling you? Maybe do you want to just go back to the beginning of that time? How did you sense a calling, having just been involved in church planting in London? And then how did you transition to actually, God's got a separate vision for our family? How did you deal with that? And how did, just tell us about those first few years maybe of being on a journey and then arriving in Vancouver.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I remember when Sarah and I had moved over to the UK in 1998, I was at I think it was a prayer meeting, or we had a visiting speaker, and during this meeting, he called me out and he prophesied about church planting, and there was a whole bunch of stuff where he really read my mail. But then he prophesied about church planting. And I remember getting in the car with the guys that I'd gone to this meeting with, and we were sort of talking about this prophetic word. And I said, well, I just think he got the wrong guy. I mean, I know he read my mail, but I just don't think I'm a church planter. I have no grid reference for that. And so I remember in 2004, when we were moving to London to be part of the team planting the church there, just being amazed, really, and realizing that God in his kindness had spoken to us 6 years before and said, this is the course that I've got you on. And so we were driving into London saying, wow, isn't it amazing? We had no idea this was part of God's purpose and plan for our lives, but here we are. And then in 1997, I had been working alongside Dave Fellingham and the Stoneleigh Band, and we'd done a tour in Eastern Canada and down into the States. And I remember being in a meeting in Fredericton, in New Brunswick, in Eastern Canada, and at that point I was engaged to Sarah, but we weren't married yet. And I just felt God speaking to me in this meeting that he had an inheritance for us in Canada. And it was significant enough that I remember writing to Sarah at the time and saying, I just come out of this meeting and feeling God speaking to me about this. And so that began to open some conversation about the future. But if I fast forward to 2008, 2009, we were involved in planting this church in London. It was I guess it was an incredible church. It's an incredible city. I think we really had owned this sense that this was a lifelong mission, and that we were giving our lives to something. And I think really that whole sense of Canada had dropped out of our minds. And so it was with some surprise. I think it was 2010, at the Brighton Leaders Conference, that we both felt God speaking to us that it was time to go again. And even that phrase, "go again," Lord, what do you mean by that? And so we did have a sense that this was church planting. Initially, we were exploring the question of, did we think maybe we could be involved in planting an English-speaking church somewhere in Western Europe? It kind of shows you how out of frame this prophetic word about Canada was at the time. But I had booked to come out to Vancouver to explore the idea of a summer school out here with Regent College. And so we were due to be flying out to Vancouver in the October of that year. And the week leading up to that, we had our couple of days of prayer and fasting, where we would gather with other leaders across the UK and pray and fast together. And during that, Steve Horn gave me a prophetic word. And he just said, "I see you as an icebreaker, and I see you crashing through this sheet ice, and other people are coming up the channel behind you." And we began to speak about worship. But at the time, I just had this real sense of God saying, "This is about Canada. This is about what I've called you to in Canada." And so that would have been the Wednesday. We flew on the Friday. So we got on the airplane with a very different sense of why we were coming. All of a sudden, it was like we knew God was speaking to us about Canada. And so I guess there was a process maybe of another 3 or 4 months where we were just praying into that, asking God, talking with the other elders in the church in London, laying it before them. November, I sort of wrestled through this point where I was saying to God, we're in such a great church. We've got such a great team. There are many reasons to stay. And here we are talking about moving our family halfway around the world in the middle of a recession. I just need to hear from you. Is it Vancouver? And I've repeatedly through a 2-week period of prayer, I just felt God say to me, "Will you take responsibility?" He never answered my question on, "Is it Vancouver?" And so at the end of those 2 weeks, I just said to the Lord, I think you're asking me to take responsibility for planting a church in Vancouver, and you can redirect us if we've got any element of that wrong, but I will take responsibility for moving forward with that. And so really that started us on the journey. We announced to the church that January that we had felt God speaking to us about planting, that we were hoping to move that September. But at that point we had no visas, we had no team, and we didn't really have any money to do it. And so just over that following 9 months, we saw God meet each one of those needs. A way into Canada, which was wonderfully provided through the church in Fredericton, who were phenomenal in the way that they brought us into them, supported us, helped us get to Vancouver. employed me in order to plant. Just a real sense of support from those guys. God gave us a team. God blessed us financially in order to be able to make the move and to begin building here. So we arrived in Vancouver in September 2011. So we've just been here 10 years now.
Fantastic.
And seen God build something over those 10 years, which has been wonderful.
Oh, good. Yeah, well, tell us a little bit about some of the highs and the lows of those formative years of, how do you build a church? How do you get it started? What went wrong? What went fantastically right? Maybe just share whatever you can, just to help us get into your mind about, and how did you process these things? Tell us a little bit about because you've been guided a lot by the prophetic, by the sounds of it. How did the prophetic sort of encourage you during those early times and holding on to what God had said, and even though it didn't look like things were happening or whatever? So tell us a little about that.
Yes, I think I feel like church planting and the call of God, there's this sense of you walk in God's purposes, but you grapple with the fact that God blesses. And then there are areas where you think, wow, this is super challenging. So I think even as I was saying earlier on, our family, when we moved, our kids were 7 and 9, and came from a really great little school in London with close friendships. Came out, we moved out to Vancouver our first year. The kids really struggled to adapt into school. Missed friends hugely back in the UK, struggled to find friends in their context school-wise in Vancouver. We're in a school that was going through some challenges in terms of its leadership, and so we were struggling to connect with teachers. And eventually, after a year, we felt we need to act. Particularly our daughter, we were just concerned that emotionally we were losing her, and so we made the decision to pull them out of school, and we homeschooled them for about 18 months, which was never in our expectation, never part of our plan. In many senses, it was a real withdrawal to have Sarah step out of most of the stuff that we were doing on a planting side of things in order to do that schooling with the kids. But we knew it was the right call, and in many senses now, as we look back, we're so grateful for that, because I think it really walked us through their teenage years. I think in terms of our closeness as a family was so defined by that season. So again, in retrospect, what felt very challenging and what felt like a real withdrawal, I think God has really blessed us through that. So on a personal level, I think we've gone through seasons where it makes me think of Moses and God saying to him, "Go and get my people out of Egypt." And he goes to Pharaoh, and I guess his expectation is he'll say to Pharaoh, God says, "Let my people go." Pharaoh will go, "Okay," and out go the Israelites. And actually what Pharaoh does is, says, "Well, I'm not going to supply you with the straw anymore, and I'm going to make it 10 times worse." And at that point, all the Israelites are like, "Who are you? Why are you doing this to us? So this is all your fault." It all gets 10 times harder for him. And I think there are these seasons where we step into the purposes of God, and our natural expectation is, well, you've called us, and therefore you'll just make a way. But actually, we go through seasons that feel much harder before we begin to see the fruitfulness, and we discover that plowing the ground is much harder than we had ever expected. And so I think we would say We've seen some wonderful times of God meeting us by his Spirit. As a church, we've seen the church grow. We've seen families thrive. We've seen marriages. We've seen people coming to faith, primarily in the context of Alpha. But I think we've also seen lots of challenges. I think we would say we would love to have seen a lot more people come to know Jesus. In fact, I would say maybe there's even been places where we've felt disappointed. Come on, God, we want to see more of this. And I certainly think that's driven us to prayer. I think we've grappled with building a people that has a sense of we really are a family. We're the family of God. We're a people together on a mission. You know, some of these phrases that we would think of as being key to our identity, I think that our context, and particularly as I look at us now, as we emerge out of COVID, where I think our individualistic Western thinking has maybe gone even deeper as we've been isolated from one another. It's like now recasting or recapturing our sense of what it means to be a people together, caught up in Jesus' mission, an identifiable family. I think these are some things that we recognize are challenges that need rebuilding again. So I think I remember Steve Tippett once saying, if you ask a pastor how things are going, he will say good and bad. I feel like that's the story. There have been many things that we're just so grateful to God for in his faithfulness, and then things that we've found super challenging. And I think just recognize that were it not for the clarity of the call of God, things that, you know, at the time might have made us say, well, gosh, I'm not sure we're cut out for this. But in all of that, you know, you can. This last September, we had Thirst, which is our weekend away as a church, and we've lived with these promises about church planting as a church, that God would use us as a hub for church planting. And for 10 years, we've prayed into that, believed God for that. For the first time at Thirst, we had ourselves a plant on the North Shore and a plant into Burnaby represented, and we were praying for one another, commissioning one another to go. And just such a sense of standing in the beginnings of the fulfillment of some of these promises. Wow. And so I think, you know, in my mind, that kind of shines some perspective back on these past 10 years. As you look back, you see, wow, under the surface, through all of this, God has been at work, and people are emerging. There's been, I know the Duggans are friends of yours as they lead the plant into Burnaby. It's just such a joy seeing people taking on things for God, moving into that.
Wonderful. Taking responsibility, just using the words that God challenged you with.
Yes, indeed.
I'd just like to ask you a little bit about maybe some of the people in your church and how having people who are in the marketplace, so people who are out there, has assisted your church growth, or you're making the connection, especially in the early years, and maybe even supported financially the church. Could you just talk a little bit into that in terms of people being Christians spread out across the city in a church planting and a church growth setting? Yes,
I think Vancouver, I think, is a very entrepreneurial city. I think the West Coast really is a story of startups in so many senses. And Vancouver is no different in that sense. And so we have quite a number of people in the church who have started businesses. My wife has been building a little accounting business over the last few years. Others are involved in property stuff, others in online digital services, and I think we've got some very mature people in business now, people who are coming into not only owning their own companies, but developing those things into even some international contexts. I think in all honesty, this is probably an area that we have much learning yet to do in. I think in many senses, there has been a kingdom view in our business people's mindset, where for some of them, they moved to Vancouver with us and have been key in terms of supporting the church financially, giving into what we're doing, bringing faith for finance. I remember one of the early days we were talking and praying about our gift day, and one of the guys in the church just said, "I think we should believe God for $100,000." And I remember this collective intake of breath in the room. I was like, whoa, could we believe God for $100,000? And God gave us $100,000 in that gift day. I mean, it was quite phenomenal. And I would say we have an incredibly generous church. The church has given and given and given. This last year, we gave all of our gift day away into both church planting, so the 2 plants that we're talking about, into serving some stuff out in Mexico, into providing for refugees, and then also into a whole load of different charities in our local area. And again, I think it's the faithfulness of people in business that really has made all of that possible. I think there's much growth for us to yet work into, in terms of how do we really partner together for the kingdom in that sense. But I do think the reality is, again, I'll use the Duggans as a great example, because they moved over to Vancouver. Part of our team came a bit later than others, but came and started a business. And that business has been part of the Trinity Central story, but that business is now making a way for them as well, in terms of sowing into what they're leading in Burnaby. And so we just see that connection in terms of what they've established on a work level, now providing for kingdom. It's like a launch pad for the kingdom, for kingdom advance and church planting. So yeah, as I say, I think we've got lots to grow in there, but God's certainly doing that with us.
Yeah, and do you think there's quite a healthy relationship between, I guess, people who are leading businesses and, I guess, the church leadership, and just a really good culture of sharing ideas and praying for one another and, I guess, serving one another? And how have you cultivated that, so that there isn't a them and us, and it's we're all in this together. We're taking the city, and it's our territory.
Yeah. I love the way you phrase that. This is us advancing together. I think again, this is an area where I would say we have lots of our frontline people are in business. So I feel like what might be better to say is that we have people who are living it and doing it. I think we've got more to learn in terms of communicating it and flying a flag for it. So I think we have people who are building great businesses in the marketplace, and pouring energy and pouring finance into the kingdom. And so, but I think we do have a lot to learn in terms of how do we maximize that communication? How do we maximize vision for the interaction of church and business? And Yeah, I think we've got more to learn in that. But I think it's safe to say that probably uh, where we are as a church, Trinity Central, and the plants that we're involved in now are very much a fruit of not just people's spiritual sowing, but people's work sowing in terms of business.
That's fantastic. Well, we're just getting to the end there, and I'd love you just to maybe wrap up by just looking over maybe the last 10, maybe 20 years, and just draw out maybe 2 or 3 things that you just want to leave with maybe a younger church planter or a younger
Yeah.
church member or someone who's going into business. Just maybe some values or some key lessons, maybe some
Yes.
do's, maybe some don'ts, and that you just love to tell maybe even your younger self.
Yes.
So
Yes.
just let's end off on that. If you can just give a few little tidbits.
Yeah. I guess one of the things that I think is maybe helpful to say is that I think um, this wonderful tension between the prophetic, which feels so immediate, and the long haul of running the race, that both of these are so important. So I think God speaks to us, God sends us. We want that sense of his voice and his presence. We want to be hearing him. We want to be directed by him. We want to be guided by him. And at the same time, I think it's so helpful for us to have a long-term mentality. We're not here for the next 3 years. We're not here for the next 5 years. We're building for the next 20, 25, 30 years. And I think that does 2 things. The first is that I think it takes pressure off the immediate. I've got to accomplish this. And I think that's true both in business and in the church. That we can feel under tremendous pressure to see success immediately. And I think rather to take a long-term view and to trust God with the fruitfulness and say, we know you've called us. And I think that's the response to the prophetic. It's the response to the call of God. When we know you've called us, we can trust you that as we take responsibility for doing what you've asked us to do, you will ultimately bring the fruitfulness, but you'll bring the fruitfulness in your time. And so we commit to the long term and the long haul. And I think building relationships into the long haul. And I think I look forward to 20 years' time enjoying relationships with people that we've been investing with over these past 10 years in particular, and just seeing what God will do through those relationships, through the church, through other plants coming on stream in due course, but also through businesses accelerating, growing, developing. And I pray for you guys and for us that there'll be a real sense of growing into some of these things that you guys are exploring. I think in terms of the whole business link idea, what does it look like for us to see these things as joined rather than separating out the spiritual and the sacred and the secular, to see that our work is spiritual and that our worship is physical in terms of our work. These things are interlinked. So
oh, fantastic. It's been an absolute privilege chatting to you, hearing your story. Just really want to bless you guys. Thank you so much, Rhys, and thanks for taking the time. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you, Lloyd. So good to be with you.